I mean, it seems so fundamental.
Just a case study. This year, to every donor, whether it's $5 or $5,000, I was sending a handwritten note. It takes me 10 minutes every week, maybe, to write those notes. And I started that with our annual campaign in December of last year, and then we sent out a fiscal year end, and we saw a significant increase from everybody who I had sent a personal note to. In some cases, actually doubled their gift.
Yeah, well, thank you because that's a very important area and one that often gets overlooked. Again, these are just some standard direct mail packages from clients I used to work with. Staffing and oversight, these are...
Her hand's too short. So
Oh, I got you. You're a little taller, I'll give you that.
Why don't you finish that and then I'll go back to my question.
Okay. So staffing and oversight, these are just some of the titles depending on the size and complexity of your organization that you might see. Certainly a director of development is critical depending on your size. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the development committee and board members' role in that. This should be a standing board committee for those of you who are on organizations. A committee chair ought to be a board member. The highest development staff member should be in attendance at all meetings. There should be, hopefully, 3 or 4 other board members that are part of this very, very important committee. Appropriate staff, depending if you're talking about events, obviously the event coordinator needs to be there. Minutes should be from monthly meetings. And I found that sometimes you get down and you've got the hour-and-a-half development committee meeting scheduled, and it just doesn't seem to be anything that pressing. So you cancel the meeting and just roll it over to next month. Try to be diligent and hold those meetings, because you'll be amazed, and once you go over the numbers, the discussion that comes out, and that time ends up being very, very productive. So I would encourage you to stick to a schedule. And I'm not saying you have to do it monthly, but it's such an important part of your organization, and it keeps everybody in alignment. And then those minutes are published to the board prior to the board meeting, so they can read over them, and you don't have to spend a lot of time on development at the board meeting because everybody's been apprised of what's going on. So that's really important. Yes, ma'am, back to you.
I'm interested in what your opinion is on the social media networking and planning that is going on. I've been doing some research and talking to some organizations about it, and I guess a year ago I was looking to several work with nonprofits, but it's really taking off when you think of Twitter and Facebook and Tumblr and a lot of others. People are really into that now, and there's a lot of credibility, and that's a whole new avenue for us.
Absolutely. And, I mean, hey, look, President Obama was elected in large part because of the networking, and that was not only donations but voting. So, I mean, that is here to stay. I think it's yet to be determined how effective a tool it will be for organizations, and I haven't seen any data on it, but I think it has a role, maybe right now more in the marketing and communication side of your organization, but it will eventually, creep into the donor side. So that's new ground for me. So I have no expertise or background in that area whatsoever. So I don't know if anybody else has any more experience. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I work with organizations that use it. They're primarily advocacy organizations that are working on policy advocacy, and it's been really effective.
Yeah, it's huge there.
It's huge in that, and it's been really effective in that. I haven't really seen it much with social service.
Yeah, the point was in advocacy, it's a major part of your strategy, and that would make sense. Yes, ma'am.
Like anything in marketing, it just depends who your donors are. If your donors are there, then it could be effective. In advocacy, everyone has one vote. In philanthropy, not everybody has the same capacity.
Good point. Good point. And to just comment on that, donors are all different. And you have some donors that like to read a lot and they want to see hard copy, and you have some donors. So give your donors options on how they want to be communicated with. Some people just want to get an email with a link and they'll go read it. Others want to get something in the mail. And so it's a combination there. And don't rule one out for the other one just because of some what may look like significant cost. Sometimes it's important to have both ways. Yes, sir.
I've just found from my own perspective that it also is a generational issue. Younger donors, and I consider myself a part of that.
Me too.
I've given through Facebook causes, and so it's, I think, opening up the idea of philanthropy, finding where the donor is. If the donor is comfortable with direct mail, then that's for that donor, but if the donor is comfortable with online, then you find wherever the donor is. It doesn't matter the medium, it doesn't matter.
And that's why the database is so important, because you might know that intuitively, but you won't know that factually unless you can look into that file and say, okay, well, this donor has only responded to direct mail pieces. This donor has responded to email solicitations on a regular basis. This donor only comes to events. So you find out what their fit is and what their preference is.
Yeah, just to add to that, you had a comment up there that people give to people, and a lot of the groups or a lot of individuals that I know who work in the nonprofit sector, do a lot of fundraising for their organizations through their own personal Facebook pages. I mean, they will promote their organization to like the 500 friends and say, it's simple as $10. And I've had friends who've raised a couple of $100, $1,000 for their organizations just by tapping into their own Facebook networks. And so for individual giving,
I think that's just great and has an audience, especially for younger college-age donors that we're trying to get into philanthropy. That's a great mechanism. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'm embarrassed to say I had to read a book to learn about how young people are speaking today, but there's a great book that I have to say. It's called Grown Up Digital. It's a fantastic book about explaining the millennium generation.
Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with it, so. Yes, ma'am.
And don't be too quick to say that these new tools like Twitter, Facebook, whatever, are just young people. The largest growing percentage of Facebook users are women aged 55 and older, and many grandmas and people like that are being written to by their young
Good point.
children, by their children, and there are huge communities where people are already out there talking about you and talking about causes that you identify with. And if you don't join the conversation, you're missing out in a tremendous way.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, just when you think you know all the rules, they all change. So, okay, let's wrap things up with a couple of takeaways. It's just things that you just go back to your organizations, and if these were the couple of things that you get out of this session, that would be meet my objective. Just make sure that to get good results, you've got board and staff working off of a plan together, and get that plan in place and make sure the communication's there, and it will generate positive results because you're on the same team and you're pulling for the same objective. Make sure your income streams are diversified. I told you, I've met with people over the last 18 months that got too heavy into a couple of donors, a couple of foundations, and they thought that money was going to come in every year, and it didn't. And it had very, very dramatic negative impacts to the organization and the people they serve. So it's just good governance to make sure that you're diversified. Attrition happens. People die, people move on to other causes, people think they've supported an organization long enough and it's time for me to move on. So it happens. So you have to continually have that pipeline that's bringing in new friends and new donors, or you're going to have some financial issues as it relates to and then we've talked about this, take care of your donors. Understand that they have, like we said, over 11,000 choices in San Diego County alone, and taking care of them is just very, very important to long-term success and keeping that attrition rate as low as possible. So, any other questions or comments? I really appreciate the feedback along the way, so I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.